Well, Maria, thank you for coming in to talk to us about Kenya and your heart for Kenya. I know there's a deep love there. I look forward to hearing more about your heart. So I'd like to start off just by asking you, what first took you to Kenya? What compelled you to go?
Well, I went on a mission trip way back in '84, and I fell in love with the people and with the country. And when I went to Bible college, I thought I always wanted to go back to Kenya as a missionary. And then, God crossed my plans and I got married and lived in America. But when it was time to retire, my husband and we always thought we will go back to Kenya, live there and minister there and be retired missionaries. So that brought me back to Kenya.
Well, you go back every year, and recently you've been trying to go back 2 times a year. What keeps you going back?
That sometimes I ask myself the question, because it is true. There are disappointing things in mission work, and there are really good things about it. But when I narrow it down, I think it is because God calls me back. And I think God has given us the Great Commission. And that's not just a suggestion, that's a real mission that He asked us to fulfill. And so the love that He gave me for the people is what drives me back. So even when there are setbacks, it's because Jesus calls me to do that, and it does reflect a little bit what He actually did. Didn't He leave the glory of the Father to come into this world? So He went, He was a missionary Himself. And so I do the same. I have to clean my throat, sorry. So, yeah. So that's why I think I'm going back. The love of God compels me. And so it's a wonderful thing to actually be partnering with God in that way.
When you go, where do you work and how do you partner with God in the mission work that He has for you in Kenya?
My primary focus are women and children in Kenya, and education is one of the keys for people to be self-sustaining. And so I work with a vocational school that educates girls from underprivileged areas and families and backgrounds for 2 years in either tailoring or in hairdressing. And so that is a great way for me to come alongside in that school and educate the girls. I teach life skills there, and I go also to other schools where I teach young people, high school students, about life, how to make decisions. I think our decisions define our destination, and when we know how to make really good decisions, we're really better placed in life to have successful and well-balanced lives. And the other part that I do is going to a primary school also to teach children, and mainly the gospel. And in all what we do, I really want to bring in the gospel and show the kids, the girls, the women, that God is really a God of love who cares for them and calls them to relationship or into a relationship with Him.
It seems like that a lot of the focus is on helping women. Can you give our viewers just an understanding what's different about a woman's experience in Kenya than you might say in the Western world? What's unique? What are the challenges that they face that we might not?
That's a heavy question. Women in that culture experience life very different. So to explain that, it's really a challenge. So the women are often dominated by men. They have very little rights. In Kenya, women couldn't even get a loan from the bank without that their husband would sign for it. So it's a very restricted lifestyle that many women have. Women's identity is very much involved in childbearing. When a woman has a child, she is not called by her first name anymore. She is called by the first name of her child. Like if she bore a son and his name would be Ben, she would be Mama Ben. She would not be Chen anymore. She would be now Mama Ben. So the identity of a woman is very much connected to childbearing, and then also to just stay at home and work from home. cooking, doing all these things, these very traditional roles. So for women, and in particular in the area I work is a Muslim area, so girls are getting married off very early, and often as a second or third wife.
Wow.
So if they don't have really good education and a way out, they will really be suppressed. So the women in Kenya, the role is very different than here. And I also see that many women don't have a really good awareness of themselves. They don't see themselves as having any rights. So they normally follow their husbands, they do what a man can leave a woman anytime. There are very many single women who have children and raise their children all by themselves. So it is very different than in our culture.
You said that they were married off very young. What's the ages that you're seeing in Kenya?
The earliest is 14 and 15.
Wow.
And particularly if they don't have a high school education, that's what they do. They marry them off.
Wow, it's an early start to marriage, especially if you're in a polygamous relationship. Be a very
absolutely, yeah,
very young age to start.
Yeah, and then the girls have children right away. So if a 15-year-old girl, her body is not developed herself, by himself, has a child already. So the risk of for her own life is incredible big. So, yeah.
Wow, so much there. So your ministry goes in and works with these women. Where have you seen God at work through your ministry, through yourself, as you have spent these years ministering in Kenya?
Well, I see God always work in my own life first. I think the first thing that we go on a mission trip and we think we change people's life. Actually, I think every time I see that, God changes actually my life, my thinking, my heart. And it is about a deepening relationship with Him in my heart. I think that's the first thing. Relying on God on a mission trip is so different than what we experience in a culture that is familiar to us. So that's the first thing I think I see always God work in my own heart. The second thing is really I also see God work in the hearts of women. And I would say this last trip, the highlight of my trip was in the vocational school that I do teach during the week, the life skills. And half of the girls, I should say that, half of the girls are Muslims and half of the girls are Christians. So, and on Sundays I'm invited to join them in their service, Sunday morning service, and then normally I preach as well during that time. And this time I was talking about the righteousness of God. And about the doctrine of the great exchange, where Jesus becomes sin so that we can become God's righteousness. And so that just this theological truth of that Jesus came to be sin for us, and that we then in exchange get the righteousness of God, that was an incredible truth that really rang true for the girls. And so at the end of the sermon I asked them if anybody wants to stay back, if they want to have prayer and rededicate their life to Jesus, or for the first time want to follow Jesus. 12 girls stayed behind. Wow. And that was really incredible. And we were there kneeling down on a cement floor and praying that God would take over their lives, confessing our sins and inviting Jesus into our hearts. I think these are these moments that makes it worthwhile to take everything, all the sacrifices that are involved. When you have this experience of people understand, girls understand more of God's love for them personal. So that I think was absolutely the highlight of my time there.
Understandably so, to see people wanting and knowing their need for God's grace and coming there and reaching out for it.
Yeah.
Now we also understand coming back this last time was unique in that COVID was shutting down a lot of different airports.
Yeah.
And I want to hear more about that story. What was going on in your heart, and also people praying for you? How did you get back to the U.S. during that time?
Well, that again, it was more adventurous than I wanted to. Actually, I didn't think that I was in any kind of difficult situation. I knew I have another week and I could go home with the normal scheduled flights. But then I ran into American, he's a professor on a seminary, and he said, "Oh, I'm trying to get a ticket home and I have a hard time." And I thought, oops, I think I should maybe look into that too. And went home and looked, and I couldn't really find a ticket. And I thought, okay, I think I really need to pray about that. And I wrote, the first thing I did was writing an email to my friends here and saying, pray me home. God needs to open a ticket. And from the 1 week where I will, kind of like it sounded like it's not that big of a deal, to the 2 days later, all the borders were closed. Then I realized now I really need to go and look for a ticket. So I bought a ticket, and it wasn't that easy because you are in a third world country, your credit card is not accepted, kind of like. So, but I bought a ticket through London because London was still open and I could go into Pittsburgh, and that would have been ideal from London to Pittsburgh. But then just the day I bought it, the news were it was closed. I could not come through London. So I had to change my flight again, and it wasn't too bad, but I needed to actually buy a different ticket. And somebody suggested, go with an American airline, that would be your best bet. And that's what I did. And then 2 days later, after I left, all borders were closed from Kenya to go actually, to leave Kenya. And so just about in the right time, I got that ticket, I got home. I needed to be 2 weeks quarantined, but that's not a big deal, being home. And wanting to be home was really, really important to me. So I think I need to say thank you to all the people who prayed for me. I felt really they prayed me home. So near Mombasa, which is on the coast of Kenya, in a smaller village that's called Ukunda. It's about 10,000, it's not that small, it's a collection of many small villages that grew together. It has about 10,000 people there. It's predominantly Muslim, because all of the influence of the Arabic world that came there, to the seafaring world and all that. So it's a small area on the coast along the east, near Tanzania. This is a small town near Tanzania on the southern part. It's about 30 miles from Mombasa. And these are many different villages that have grown together into a town with about 10,000 people. It's called Ukunda. But you don't need to go far from the town. If you go for a mile back in the country, you're really in a very different world. It's very rural there. People don't have water or electricity. They live very simple lives. So they live from what grows on in the ground and have very little in contact with the world, outside world. So yeah, that's a very rural area in general. But it has also, it's not far because it is close to the coast. It has also this other part to it. It's like there are a lot of tourists coming in the high season, who come from Europe mainly, but also from America. And so that's a mixture of cultures. So there's this Western world, and if you live very near the coast, you hardly feel like that you are in a different world. And then you live a block or two away, and you enter a completely different world. So it's kind of like both cultures almost exist close to one another.
And there's quite a bit of disparity between them as well.
Pardon me?
There's a lot of disparity between the two worlds.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. There's wealth, and then there is poverty. And the other thing that's really sad, I think that always really makes me sad, is there's a lot of sex trafficking in this area, and a lot of kids also are exposed to that and are exploited.
So as you're working in this town, tell us about the challenges that you face, and where are the successes? Where are the stories that make you excited about going back and working with them?
What the challenges I face, I think, is often that the people, or many of them, are from a Muslim background. So I have to be careful in how much I can actually talk about Jesus. Although I have a lot of freedom, there's always there's an oppression of people that I can see that they are not as free of receiving and talking even at times about Jesus. Sure. Another challenge is this is a rather corrupt society, and so you're always faced with they try to take advantage of you and to kind of like to cheat you. And I find that personally really hard because every time I go shopping, I would most likely pay way more because of my color of my skin. And so this can wear you down if you're there for a long time. You're always also seen as somebody who has money. And so the challenge is they always ask you, and you have to work through that. It's kind of like, it's okay for me to say no when people ask me. I don't need to, I have more to give than just money. I really want to give them Jesus and talk about that. So to find openings to talk about Jesus is really at times a challenge. When I go to schools, the challenge is that, again, the overwhelming needs that people have, and they have really needs. I mean, they are poor, so that they don't see me just as somebody who comes to help their needs, but really that I can speak into their spiritual needs and present the gospel to them. So I think that's in a way really challenging at times. Fortunately, in some of the schools that I am allowed to go, there's much freedom for me to really speak very openly. And that's really where the joy comes in to do ministry, that children hear the gospel really well, that they are called to follow Jesus, and that there's a freedom. And I have seen that in students' lives, that they are changed, that they have decided, I want to follow Jesus. And we can help them with school fees and really see them grow and start to spread, the good news among themselves. And so I think there are lots of really positive influences that we can bring, or that I can bring.
Marie, when you were talking about the challenges of working in some of these Muslim contexts, you talked about just the lack of freedom you felt of fully engaging. I'm just curious, what was behind that? Was there a sense of that you weren't personally safe, or was it a sense that you didn't resonate? And so if you talk too freely about Christ, you might lose future opportunities with those contexts. Can you speak more into what holds you back at times, or you feel this sense of difference?
I think I'm more aware of that. I do not want to offend people. Not out of personal safety reasons, but for them to, if you are too strong coming on right in the beginning, they close down their minds. And that's what you don't want to. You want to have an open mind that you can bring the ideas of Christianity or of Jesus being the Son of God into their lives. So if you're too strong right away, I think that shuts doors, and that we don't want. I want to have an open relationship with people where they can engage in conversation. So I think that's much more my concern about it. I hope that
That's
makes
a great
sense.
answer, and it helps explain that your goal is really to preserve influence and opportunities for ministry rather than shut them down prematurely.
Right. And it's, as always, it is built on relationships, kind of like if I come just with a plain, this is it, I think, especially in the Muslim culture, you're missing a lot because it is a relational culture. And so you want to invest into the relationships. And that's why I think coming back year after year makes sense, because you build on existing relationships. So.
And how have you seen that play out going back year after year, especially in those Muslim contexts? What's different? What's changed? What's new?
I think there's a level of trust that grows, and so therefore I start to see people to open up more about their private or personal issues. I had this year more non-Christians coming for coaching to me than ever before, and so that I think is a fruit from me being there on a regular basis, because people know me. I'm part of their community, at least for part of the year. And so I think that I can see that the trust grows, and so they talk more about their most inner, feelings and problems, which is really an honor to be part of it, that they entrust their hearts to me. And that gives an opportunity to speak about the truth.
How are you praying now for Kenya, and how would you like us to join with you?
Well, to pray for Kenya right now for me looks like that. I think I'm more so concerned about the safety of my friends. A lot of people have lost their jobs, like here in our country, but they don't have any social network that would catch them. So if you don't go to work, you're not eating, and there's nobody who provides food for you. So I think a lot of them are starving right now, and it really hurts for me to see or to know that. Some of them, there was a lot of violence in the Mombasa area. That's the area where I am normally working. So police beating up people was a pretty normal thing that you can see there. Wow. So people are not as safe anymore. So my heart goes out for them, and to pray for them that, in particular, the Christian friends really can stick together and help and support one another, that there is an encouragement for one another, because they are all in the same boat. And my prayer is also that they recognize Jesus even more as their Savior, as we need to. It's kind of like that time where we're almost forced to think more about, or we are more open, spiritually hungry for knowing God in a more deeper and personal way. And that is my prayer for my friends in Kenya too, that they know Jesus is sufficient, that He is there, that He is their Savior, and He protects them, and they can rely on Him, and He is the strong rock that stands in midst of all of that. So that's my prayer. My prayer is also that God would open the doors for me to go back and see what we can rebuild, what maybe was torn down during this time, in relationships, with personal needs, the lack of food, how God has a future for that people, and I hope that I can be part of that future.
You suggested things were torn down. Can you speak to what you've already seen that's been torn down?
Just kind of like I think the relational aspect of it, that the violence makes a difference in people's life. If you are fearing for your life and you cannot go out on the street because the police is maybe hitting you, or that is a profound way of that, tears your own heart apart. And then also in the community, if you're not connected, and they don't have internet, they have no live streaming, of a service, so they're not connected, that tears people apart. And I think unity is something that God needs to give right now.
Thank you for giving us an insight of what it looks like to be going through this time in Kenya, and just the different context, the violence, the disconnection, how we can be praying for that. Appreciate that.
As well. So overall, it was a really fruitful trip. The end was definitely different than what I expected, but that is our God. He always has good surprises for us, and so I'm glad to be on His team and work alongside Him. So thank you so much, North Park Church. It was good to be sent out by you and also be received by you again. And I do need to say, I miss the church, and I'm looking forward when I can hug you again. Bye.